Welcome to the Great Girlfriends podcast, where we discuss life, love, laughter, and everything in between. I'm your host, Sibylla Muti. Well, great girlfriends, you are in for an absolute treat. I think, again, my travels around the world, my virtual travels, I should say, have led me into the laps of some dynamic women, and I get to bring them all forward. And one of them today is a beautiful fellow pod mama who is a content creator, who is an all-star executive producer, I can even say, because she's been in media for many, many years. She's also got a little bit of a comedian's bone, because I think our pre-conversation made me laugh quite a bit. And so I just want to welcome Damona Hoffman to the show. Hi, Damona. How are you?
Oh, I'm good. Thank you. I'm like, wait, now I have big comedy shoes to fill.
Yes. I think there's a tour in your future.
Your expectations.
You are already there. I think there's a tour somewhere in your future. And when that happens, I just want you to send me a ticket to the front row so I can just say, I remember when. I think it's fair.
It's funny because I actually used to work with comedians. When I worked at NBC, I started their talent diversity program, and I actually would travel the country and do open call auditions for stand-up. So a lot of the comedians that you know and love today actually started from an open call that I held. So I can't imagine I could compete with any of them, but I do what I do. I do my podcast and I have fun doing it. So I think that's what really shows.
I know. I love it. I love it. And again, when I call you pod mama, it's because there's a whole bunch of us out here who are in the pod world who have birthed these babies from the house. Mm-hmm. And, we did not know what podcasting was. We didn't know what tools to use, but we knew we had a message. We knew we had content that we wanted to deliver to the world. And you happen to be a fellow pod mama. And I just want to give a little bit about you. I've got this really deep bio that I love here that I would like to share. Is that okay? A lot of people go, no bio. Is that okay with you?
Oh, no, of course. Go ahead.
Okay, perfect. So Damona Hoffman is a dating coach and entrepreneur who starred in A&E Network's TV series Black Love and A Question of Love. She's a contributor for the LA Times, the Washington Post, CNN Headline News, The Drew Barrymore Show, and more. Previously, Damona held creative executive positions at CBS, Paramount, and NBC Universal. A happily married mother of two, she's thrilled to return as host for season 3 of I Make a Living, which is her podcast that we're going to dive into today. And we're just going to find out so much more about you, Damona, because you live across multiple worlds as I do, as a wife, as a mom, as a podcaster, as a content creator, even as a former executive, and you leaped out on faith to start something of your own. So there's so much power behind your story. I'd love to know what your big why is, why you do what you do, and how you do what you do.
Oh, such good questions, and ones that I should probably have an answer to right away. But I have to admit, I've changed directions quite a few times. And there have been so many times when I was like, I am so clear on what I'm doing with my life. And this is my mission. This is what I'm here to do. Mm-hmm. And then something happens. Then you get a different job, or you have a baby, or, something in your life changes. And then you realize what you thought you knew about yourself or your life path has to be flexible and you have to be willing to change. So yeah, even in my time as a TV executive, I made a few pivots within that. I started out in casting, and I just didn't see, as a person of color, a lot of people who looked like me on television. And I was really passionate about doing something to change that. So I ended up moving over from CBS to NBC to start their talent diversity program, as I said earlier. And then from there, I was like, well, this is great, and I'm finding a lot of talent, but really, I would like to be creating content myself and not just serving up talent for the other executives to then put into their shows, but I want to be the decision maker. Mm-hmm. And that's when I ended up moving into a programming role, which began this whole crazy journey as an independent content creator. So going back to your question, my why, I guess that's the how. The why is really, I want to, first of all, do work that makes me feel good. There were a lot of jobs I had, a lot of projects I've worked on that did not spark joy for me, as Marie Kondo would say.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to this point where I was working like 60 hours a week. I was in this glamorous job. I was doing all of this. I was traveling around and working up the chain. I was the vice president of programming. And after I had my daughter, I was just like, this is not, I don't think this is how it's supposed to go. I would be the first one to get to work and then the first one to leave at like 6:30, and then the last one to get to daycare every day. And then I would go home and do it all over again. I would work through the night and then go home and do it all over again and get up the next day. And I was like, this is exhausting. There has to be a better way. So that's what really inspired me to pivot my career and really build it around the lifestyle that I wanted to have.
Mm-hmm. That's so good. So you start asking these, like, I mean, I guess too, we've all been in, well, let's say we all, but many of us have been in that spot where you look up and you realize that the dream doesn't feel like the dream. The goal doesn't feel like the goal. It's not adding up. And then you have a choice that you can make. We get to choose that next step. We get to make a hard decision. I mean, they're not going to be easy, especially when you have a family. Those are, geez, and you have little ones, but you do know that you have to show up for yourself. And I hear you saying that you wanted to build and curate the story that felt authentic and real for you.
Yes, that's absolutely it. And this has been an ongoing learning. So I in no way have this all figured out.
Of course.
But
yeah.
I came to the conclusion, I'd been doing my own podcast. So to just back up a little bit into what the pivot ended up being, I had actually been writing dating profiles for people on the side for years because I worked in casting and I knew like how to have a headshot that would really stand out and catch someone's attention. And then basically that headshot was the same thing as a dating profile photo. So I started out just like helping people with dating profiles and I got really good at it. And I had helped a lot of people get engaged and married and have babies and launch their lives, their romantic lives. But I never thought of it as something I could do as a career. And then once I left my VP of programming job, I was just like, well, what am I going to do next? Well, maybe I could like start a blog and do something with this dating coaching thing until something better comes along. And then when I really sat down and I actually hired a life coach and worked through it, I realized actually this was the path and this was what I was supposed to be doing. I interviewed for 17 jobs in television and got to be like the second or third choice on all of them and didn't get any. And I was like, this has got to be a sign that I am not headed in the right path. So as soon as I turned towards dating coaching, things really started to take off very quickly. And I thought, gosh, podcasting, this is 8 years ago, and podcasting was completely in its infancy. And nobody, you were saying earlier, so many people don't know what they're doing when they start a podcast. Like nobody knew what they were doing back then.
That's right.
But I was like, this is an opportunity for me to create sort of a calling card for my dating coaching business, to use my skills as a producer and make my own content and see where it takes me. And it led me to doing 2 TV shows. I'm still doing that podcast to this day. It's brought a lot of clients my way. It's led me to do the Drew Barrymore show, where I'm the love expert on air for that show. And then I started to think about 2 years ago, like I love doing the dating and relationship content, but is that all that I could do? Are there other topics? Are there other worlds that I can lend my voice to? And the I Make a Living and FreshBooks partnership was sort of born out of that.
So good. Partnership is a huge game changer for podcasters. And it really helps to, create a bridge for content, for you to really introduce new conversation. But as a content creator, like you said, you find yourself sometimes stuck in a lane and you want to really expand and don't really know how. What was it that, how did you rather create the partnership or reach out to say, hey, I'd like to partner. I have content that your audience would like to hear?
Well, it actually kind of worked backwards. I mean, I really actually just applied to the job. I was at a podcasting conference and I was speaking there, and I had gotten invited by my now producer at FreshBooks, Paco Arizmendi. He invited me to this dinner with some of the other speakers, and FreshBooks has always, just to give everyone a sense of what FreshBooks does, it's cloud accounting solutions for small business owners and their teams.
Mm-hmm.
So they had always been about building community. As an entrepreneur, it can be very lonely out there, and you don't know what you're doing. You don't know who to ask the questions of. And so they really wanted to create community around what they could offer, and also build partnerships, build alliances through bringing people together. So they started with dinner series, and then they branched out into live event series. So this was sort of an extension of that. And I went on a whim, like, well, I'll go to this dinner. I don't know anybody who's going, but I'm at this podcasting conference. I'm here to meet people, and we'll just see. And he was telling about what he was looking for in this host, and host and producer. And on the surface, I thought, well, I'm not a finance expert. I wouldn't be the right person for this. But as he talked about what the show was about, it's really about telling people stories and the lifestyle of the entrepreneur. I said, well, I'm a lifestyle content creator. Actually, I am a small business owner, so I can relate to this audience. I love talking to people and getting them to tell their stories as well. And so I was like, I'm going to throw my hat in the ring and see. So I had to do a sample and a pitch for the season and all of that. And then they brought me on as their host and producer for season 2. And we're about to start production on season 4. So really in that respect, it was FreshBooks' existing podcast. And then I was able to kind of put my spin on it and lend my voice to it. I have a lot of other collaborations that I've done with brands in producing content in-house and also under their brand for them, which we can talk about if that's interesting. But I just really started with expanding my own definition for what I did or what I could do.
That's so good. So, and I hope someone wrote that down because I'm writing it down. Expand your own definition of what you can do.
Right. I mean, we get so limited. We get limited by our own boxes that we put ourselves in. And then also the path that other people have carved before us. Like I'm actually, through doing my other podcast, Dates and Mates, I've met a lot of other dating experts in my industry, and we'd always get together and trade secrets and, share tips and collaborate, and everybody told me their way of doing it. And I tried so hard to do it their way. And I would emulate their copy and use their consultants and try and do it their way. And it just never felt right. And I really had to step back and say, just because that works for those people doesn't mean, well, one, I was making myself crazy trying to fit into that mold. And two, it doesn't honor the experience that I bring to the table as a content creator. So I really kind of shifted beyond just thinking of myself as a dating coach, but thinking of myself more as a lifestyle content brand and content creator.
I love that. That expanded definition makes room for you to become. It's just the becoming can happen, right? Like you really give yourself permission to become something, because when you have those very limited boxes that we live in, you don't give yourself permission to become, and more is sitting on the outside of the box. And we have to really break our own barriers before, we can welcome and retain more,
Yeah. And a lot of this discovery, I think, has happened through podcasting.
Yes.
Like I have found where I can go from just trying it, just doing it. So for anyone listening that's like, well, this is great. They're great at podcasting, but I don't know where to start. Sometimes I think we get paralyzed by the fear of the unknown. Like just because you haven't done it before doesn't mean you can't do it. And maybe it won't be perfect the first time. I have been on a huge learning curve in all of my content creation journeys, but through each experience, it sort of has leveled me up, has expanded my skill set, has brought new collaborators into my world, and I take a little piece of everything that I've learned from each experience and just keep building.
I love that. That felt so soul soothing. That was a really great balm, like a very soothing, because I will tell you, a lot of people have found themselves in our community just asking themselves, how do I start? How do I start? And the aspiration is to start. And, I can tell them a million times that you gotta, you either fall in the deep water or you force yourself out there. But it's another thing to hear it from someone else to say that you create this expanded definition of who you are and what you're capable of. And that introduces you to another dimension of life. And specifically, I want to just say as a mom, I feel like the complexity goes even deeper because you want to provide sustainability and you want to make sure that your household is always taken care of and you want stability for your kids. So, you have to ask yourself deeper, bigger questions. And I'm just kind of curious for you, what are some of the things or questions that you asked yourself to give permission to expand a bit when you're thinking of like your children and your legacy there?
You ask the really big and deep questions. And I'm like, I should have really thought about that before.
Out of you. No, I'm like, listen, Damona, I figured out in the first 5 minutes of our conversation before we started recording that you were my kind of guest and that I was not going to let you go until I combed through everything. I know these great girlfriends want to know. You have it all. So I just want to pull it out. I'm pulling it out.
Well, thank you. Maybe you can help me get some clarity for myself because I'm like, I don't know how it works, but I can tell you.
You offered something to yourself.
I can tell you how I do it. I mean, First of all, my husband is my rock and he is none of this would be possible without him. And I'm not saying that in a way of like giving away my power, but just really he enabled me to take this leap and was like, and trust me, there were plenty of years where I was making a lot more money than he was. But when you're taking a big leap and starting something out, it was really helpful to know like, okay, I got you while you're launching this. Like, don't worry about how much money it's making. Cause I left also a pretty lucrative job as a VP. That was the biggest, scariest thing to do. But having that pressure where it's like, it doesn't have to turn a profit right away. Cause it takes a long time to be profitable when you're starting a business or new venture. Yeah. And we hear all these stories about somebody who lucked into this online marketing or social media jackpot, but we hear those stories because they're unusual. We don't want to hear the stories like mine was like, I was in the trenches for 8 years.
Yeah. Like you put in hard work.
Getting up early, working late, taking my kids to daycare and then rushing home and getting dressed and putting on makeup to do a TV segment and then running back, So I've done all of that. But it really is part of the process. And we have ongoing conversations. We're always recalibrating and asking, like, even just today, actually, my husband got a really huge job offer and it literally career defining job offer, but we live in Los Angeles and it's in London. And this was like a 2-week discussion of like, can we do this? And ultimately he decided on his own, but after discussions with me, that it would be too disruptive for our family life. And so that's how my household works. Like we discuss all of those big things and we really play it out. How would this work out? And even day to day, like, it sounds very glamorous. I'm here in my podcast studio, which fortunately, like we converted my garage to a studio so I can shut the door. I
Yeah.
can't hear the kids. I'm
Yeah.
soundproofing. I'm in my own little bubble. But just a minute ago, I was just inside like, y'all better not come knocking on the door
That's
because
right.
I'm recording, right? So it's this constant ebb and flow, and especially in the middle of a pandemic
Yeah.
where those lines are so blurred anyway. If you have a partner that you're doing this with, you have to be willing to have some of those difficult conversations, and you have to be willing to build the vision together if you want to have a functional lifestyle.
Yeah, that's so true. It's so true. It's so true. Otherwise, it'll feel divisive, and it'll feel like it's destroying the structure, and it will tear away, and the guilt will kick in, and oh, Lord knows that guilt is a heavy thing to bear.
Oh, that mom guilt is awful too. But I have very firm boundaries also with my work. For the most part, I do not work between 5:30 and 7:30, and I try as hard as I can not to work on the weekends because that's my family time. And so when I'm here when I'm in the garage,
Yes,
/ studio, when I'm in my home studio, I'm on the grind. I am getting my work done. There is no downtime. I'm 100%. And that's the hard thing, I think, for a lot of moms. It's like you're 100% here, but then I'm 100% there as well. At 5:30, that's where my focus is.
Yeah.
But I had to really block that time because it's even easier now for those boundaries to get blurred if you're not really clear about where they are.
Mm-hmm. It's so good. It's a game changer. And may I ask how old your children are?
They are like, how old are they? Old enough to know better. 6 and 10.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they're at that age. Absolutely. And I relate completely. And learned very early that without the boundaries, life becomes so fluid that the results are all kind of wasted away. You just never really see the forward movement you want to see. And when you do create those boundaries, everyone can appreciate the time. The quality is richer on everything, on every front, when you kind of isolate that time. Yeah.
Yeah. And we're always recalibrating too. Like, we realize that if we meal plan, and believe me, I am not a mom expert.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I haven't figured it all out. We're still.
Damona, is there such
I don't know. There's
I'm like,
and I'm like, oh, she has it all figured out, And there are definitely people's houses, like back before we could go in people's houses before the pandemic. You know those houses where you look at them and you're like, how? Where's all your stuff? Like,
yeah.
It's so clean.
Like,
I don't have one of those houses. That is the thing. Like, you can't do it all. That is the thing that falls off. Like, I had dishes yesterday piled up, above the sink, and dog hair was everywhere. The laundry wasn't done. Like, that's always the thing for me that I'll put off over spending time with my family. Mm-hmm. But we decided if we meal plan and we decide in advance on family dinners, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and we're going to sit down as a family and eat instead of everybody just, what we had been doing is just everyone just runs to the refrigerator and pulls out whatever leftovers they want to eat.
Right.
But when we prepare for it, then it's so much more functional. It's more peaceful. We can plan it in our minds. Our kids are more on board and everybody's working as a team.
That's so good. So good. Okay. Speaking of team, this will be my last question because I don't want to keep you forever. I know you're in your amazing studio, but I also know about these time boundaries. They're so important. Speaking of team, in terms of as an entrepreneur, how did you know it was time to build a team? How did you know that I make a living? I know you were supported in the development of that podcast, but how did you know that it was time for you to build a team around your dream or your goals?
Oh, yeah. I initially, it was hard for me from the beginning because having been an executive, I always had a team. Like, in addition to having an assistant that basically ran my life. And I was in probably 7 hours of pitch meetings or story meetings every day, I would just like run out of my office and be like, where am I going next? What's the next thing? So I was very reliant on my assistant to manage my life. But in addition to that, working at a TV network, there's somebody for everything. There's a legal department that closes your deals. There's a marketing department. I would get the promos from the promo department. You know, everyone had their function. And that was a really big culture shock to me when suddenly I was wearing all of those hats and I didn't even have my assistant to support me in that. So I kind of, I don't want to say I flailed, but I struggled through that for, I would say like 2 years, before I realized I didn't have the bandwidth to do everything myself. And I got smart eventually about outsourcing the right jobs to the right people. So initially I just brought in like a part-time producer to help me with the Dates and Mates podcast and the other content I was doing in-house. And then I would outsource different elements. Like I have an editor that just does editing. I had a social media person that like takes my quotes that I do in media and would turn them into social media assets, or use clips from the podcast, and being able to delegate things to someone that has that specific expertise. Because believe me, I did it the wrong way. I tried to figure out every single job there was. And I was like, if I'm running this company, I'm going to know how to do every job. And I can. Like, I taught myself how to edit. I taught myself about email marketing. I taught myself all of these things, which are great to know. But in all honesty, it'll take a lot less time and be executed much better if I delegate it to someone who has that level of expertise. So I've kind of been adding to my team as I've gone along. In the last, about 2 years ago, I brought in a full-time in-house producer who helps me execute all my content. And then it just got to the point where now we need to bring on another person to the team just because the volume has gotten so great that we can't handle it. And it's always when I get to the point where I'm like, that spinning plates feeling?
Yeah.
Right? Where you're just like, oh, something is going to fall down.
Yep.
When I get to that point, then I revisit it and I say, okay, and especially like I am always about helping the people on my team learn and grow. And so when I see someone on my team that's struggling or that is overloaded with work, then I know that's my job to start back at the top of what do we need? What can we outsource? What can we take off of her plate so she can focus on the things that she really enjoys and that she's really good at? And fortunately, doing a branded podcast with FreshBooks at I Make a Living, Paco had already had the team in place. We have an amazing editor who also composes original music for every episode, which is insane and wonderful.
Wow. Yeah.
And then we have the FreshBooks team that creates assets for social and helps us with show notes and all of that other stuff. So it is kind of nice as somebody that comes from corporate content to be like, oh, there are people here.
Yes, like the boat came.
Right, exactly.
Oh,
but with more people, of course, with more cooks in the kitchen, that's more conversations, that's more misunderstandings. So, for anyone that's kind of at that point where they're wondering, is this the right time? Instead of just thinking of like, what can I get off my plate if I'm overloaded? Think about like, what can I manage? Because you'll still be managing the process, even if you bring somebody in and delegate to them. But my team's pretty small. I would love to have like 10 more people. But for now, it's pretty much just me and my producer and then the FreshBooks team for that show, and we add on as we need to.
Yeah. And I think sometimes, one of my favorite quotes, or a mentor of mine said, the business builds itself. And What she meant from that is that the business will speak to you. Like it will tell you when it's time to groom another category, when it's time to introduce an assistant, because the business will ask for more. And when you're paying attention to your business, then you'll recognize when those moments come your way. And I can say I've seen that. And I can say there have been times when I've felt like I needed to push myself a little more and stretch and, promote more and bring new eyes in and dream bigger. So I think that there's a little bit of balance of, yes, your business will tell you. And as a leader, then we have to kind of figure out when it's time to call the boat and say, hey, I'm going to need some infrastructure support, because that infrastructure is a game changer. It really will take you a lot further faster, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually learned, the other amazing benefit of doing the I Make a Living podcast is I get to talk to other entrepreneurs about how they run their businesses and people who have completely different expertise from me. And so I pick up little tips and tricks along the way. And actually, there was something that really resonated for me in an interview in season 3 with a fellow named Danny, who runs a company called BTA Academy. And he was saying that a lot of entrepreneurs, when they're hiring, they think just about, like, of course, everyone's looking at the bottom line. Like, can I afford it? Well, if I make $100,000 and my assistant costs me $50,000, then I'm only going to make $50,000. And you're thinking about just the money that you have on the table right now. Mm-hmm. But if you think about it in terms of the potential, what could you earn if you had someone who frees up some of that day-to-day, the day-to-day details that you're managing in your brain, so that you can be thinking long-term planning and thinking strategically and really expanding your business bigger, it will end up paying for itself. But if you're always looking for the money, like, well, I have this much, and if I hire this person, then the math doesn't work out, you're always going to be stuck where you are and not able to grow to where you want to be.
So true. So true. Knowing when to make that investment, that is key. Absolutely.
It's a leap of faith, right?
It is a leap of faith. Oh my goodness. All right. So for all of those who are curious about more for the Make a Living podcast, I Make a Living podcast, and just want to follow you and all of your adventures, because, life is an adventure for me, I believe. I'd love to know where we can keep up with you and connect more.
I agree with you that life is an adventure. And even in a pandemic, I maintain that philosophy. So you can follow my adventures on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter at Damona Hoffman. And you can also listen to the I Make a Living podcast wherever you're listening to this podcast right now, or if you're in the market for dating and relationship advice, there's always Dates and Mates as well.
Very good. Thank you so much, Damona.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Great girlfriends, did you enjoy this week's episode of the podcast? If so, would you please give us your amazing review on iTunes? Every single review helps another great girlfriend get plugged into the podcast, into the community. Speaking of community, make sure you join our Facebook group, The Great Girlfriends. You follow us on Instagram at The Great Girlfriends and on Twitter at @the_great_GFS. Last but not least, we'd like to thank my amazing husband, Kwaku, Sam and Dilly, and all of you for being a part of the global community that makes us so strong. Please remember to share with your friends. Keep listening and keep being a great girlfriend. I'm Sybil Amuti, and I'm out. Peace.